Hello, great students. Today we are talking about parties and interest groups. It's going to be, we have a lot to cover. So let's get started. But first I want to just introduce myself. My name is Dr. Wes Jamison. I went to school in Texas. I got my bachelor's and master's from the University of Texas at San Antonio in economics. And then I got my master's and my Ph.D. in political science from the greatest university on the face of the planet, Texas Tech. Texas Tech University, Reckham Tech. So yeah, I will be your guide today for parties and interest groups, and I'm so excited to have you guys. Anyways, let's get started. Let's ask the first question, which is, what is a political party? Political parties are just a group of people that share similar ideology. Now, this ideology can be about, on the Republican side, which is the right, or the Democratic side, which is on the left, or it can have a lot of different facets to that. In other countries, we see a lot of different political parties that have different facets of both the right and the left. But the thing they are all trying to do, the similar part about all of them, is they're all trying to control the government. I think we have to try to kind of define the parts of the party, especially in America today. And our textbook describes this as both pig and pie. Pig, of course, party in the government, and pie, party in the electorate. Let me kind of break those down for you just a little bit. Party in the government is the very people we think of when we think about politicians and politics. It is our elected officials, the people that we put in power. Here we see 3 former presidents with absolutely rockin' hair. These guys do things like provide leadership. They pass legislation. They form coalitions. This is the heart of what American government is all about. Of course, all of their work happens in these really expensive buildings at state capitals and our nation's capital, right? But party in the electorate, of course, is different. These are citizens that follow a political group because of a shared ideology, right? These ideologies are based on party platforms. Now, a party platform is what your party believes in. In America, we can say that Democrats believe in the right for a woman to choose what's best for her body. And the Republicans, they believe in the sanctity of life. And these kind of pivotal issues define which parties, but not just those 2 issues, not that just that issue alone. There are so many other issues that divide these 2 parties. What to do with the impoverished of our nation, for instance. Should there be welfare or not? How much welfare should there be? Should people receive unemployment insurance? These are the things that divide us along this right and left spectrum in America. This is what builds a party platform. These party platforms, these policy positions, they can change. They can change, and they have been known to change. And we're fixing to go through a whole idea, a brief history of America and how these policy positions have changed and how the political parties have changed with them. But just a few examples is, for instance, the freedom of speech, right? Freedom of speech used to be an idea heralded by the left, the Democrat side, let's say the early 2000s when the Iraq War was happening. Lately, in the early 2020s, we have seen freedom of speech switch to the right and the Republicans. And so these ideas of, like, for instance, even something as simple as freedom of speech, it can change over time. Essentially, though, party in the electorate, it's us. It is the people. It is you. It is I. It is anybody that believes in the ideology of a party. And maybe even those that specifically don't believe in the ideology of a party. As long as you have some opinion and are active, let's say in either like this young man's doing right here, which is, filling out surveys or voting or trying to rally your friends. This is what makes the party in the electorate. It is us. It is our local grassroots campaigning that does it. Moving on to a brief history of our political system, we should start from the very beginning, the first party system, right when our country was just a brand new little fledgling little country. our founding fathers, especially George Washington, did not believe in parties. They thought parties, which were they called factions, would just cause a lot of problems. And boy, where was he right. But the thing is, in debating policies, these factions formed naturally. So eventually, where they had no party system, eventually they were like, okay. And what ended up happening is we had our first two parties, the Federalist side and the Anti-Federalist side. Now, the Federalists believe in a strong national government, while the Anti-Federalists believe in more states' rights. And this very first argument is what created the very first parties. So, wow, the second era of parties is what we call the rise of political parties. Happened from 1828 to 1860. And two new parties arrived. We have the Democrats and the Whigs. Now, what separated these parties down this cleavage line was the Democrats were, surprisingly enough, the Democrats were very strong on slavery. They wanted to keep the slaves. They wanted the slaves to remain. They called it free labor. Now, the Whigs were, let's say, half anti-slavery and half pro-slavery. And this would eventually become their undoing. But yes, slavery was the main issue at this time. Eventually, this fight over slavery led to, of course, the Civil War. And as the Civil War subsided and the winners and losers were meted out, two new parties, one new party was created called the Republicans, right? And we still had the Democrats. The Democrats controlled the former Confederate states at this point, the South, and they were still limiting rights for slaves. The Republicans was the new party created up north, and they controlled the Midwest and the Northeast, and they promoted more equal rights. They did not want slaves and found that it was boorish. But this would be considered the third party system in America. The fourth party system in America happened between 1896 and 1932. And this happened during the Second Industrial Revolution. We saw growth in all public sectors. And guess who was doing most of the labor? No longer were slaves used. It was now our children. Yes, our children were certainly working the factories. And both parties wrestled for control. Both parties had pretty much equal footing. We're talking about the Republicans and the Democrats here. But something happened that changed this, and we'll get to that in our next slide. But the technical revolution, or the Second Industrial Revolution, brought wealth and inequality. So the wealth got really wealthy, and the poor, of course, got very much poorer in the USA. Eventually, in 1929, the market burst, and thus beginning the Depression, right? And there was one man to pull it all out of him, and that was FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in 1940, he instituted the New Deal. This was a huge change for America. Lots and lots of government programs to provide for the poor. One of the things that FDR did do was he outlawed child workers. Now, he didn't do this for the sanctity of the children, to protect the children. What he did it for was to provide more jobs for adults so that they can earn real living wages. So keep that in mind. In order for America to ban child labor, we had to have adults not have jobs and those good children taking those jobs. So FDR and the Democrats create the New Deal, which provides everybody security, a safety net. Some people might even call it social security. The Democrats then become the party for civil rights, and then the Republicans shift to something called the Grand Old Party. And now we have what is seemingly set up as the Democrats that we know today versus the Republicans we know today. Of course, brings us to today. And ever since 1972 to today, we have had the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats, of course, being liberal. The Republicans, of course, being conservative. And we can see from this graph that we are beginning to become more and more polarized, right? The right being more right than ever and the left being more left than ever. And as we can see, even in the last 10 years, we have seen a even further divergence from the parties. There's rarely any compromise in our politics today. And this is because of the hyper-partisan nature of our political parties today. And this is fed on by us, the people. We can't often very easily sit around a dinner table anymore without getting into some kind of an argument over politics. And what we need to realize is that we once were a nation that could compromise, that we could talk and really see that we're more similar than different. But instead, we are seeing more and more, we're focusing on our differences rather than our similarities. These differences, born out by different policy ideas, and we often reduce this down to, oh, you're a Democrat, or oh, you're a conservative Republican. And it's this party identification that seems to define us now instead of who we are as people, the things that we can agree on. So how do we even choose a party to begin with? So party identification in political science really comes down to a simple thing, right? How do you choose a party? Mostly this is influenced by your mom and dad or your guardians that you grew up with. This starts at a very young age, and we start to learn that, oh, Democrats bad, or oh, Republicans good or bad, or, you know, either way, we start to feel this way at a very young age, and this is brought on by those that inform us, which is usually our family. Also, though, our demographics, who we surround ourselves with, our socialization of our neighborhoods. Just to show you how much our demographics actually determine which parties that we're a part of, here is a very large survey that you can find in your book that identifies certain groups with certain parties. If we look at the first one, we can see that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are often Republican. White evangelical Protestants, white Southerners, white men, some college or less, and just basically being white all leads you to be a Republican. Now, the white column is very close to 50-50, but we also see that older people tend to be Republican. Looking at the Democratic side, though, if you fall into an ethnic minority, such as being African American or Asian, you tend to be Democrat. The religiously unaffiliated tend to be Democrat. Jewish, Hispanic, and surprisingly enough, a lot of young people want to be Democrat. And these kind of trends have borne out throughout time. We are looking at probably the last 30 years that we have seen these trends being borne out. So demographics, of course, yes, play a vital role in which party you choose. Moving on to our second question, the second part of this chapter is, what is an interest group? Interest groups are organizations that have very limited goals, right? They have usually one single issue, but sometimes they have a few more broader issues, but they're trying to influence the government to affect these issues. They lobby government officials. They mobilize the public. They're trying to get you to care about the issues that they care about. And here we see some examples of this, but there are many different types. There are economic interest groups like the WEF, that's the World Economic Forum, and they handle more global economic issues. Or there's economic groups like the Chamber of Commerce that may affect your very tiny town or large city. Citizen or public interest groups like the NRA, the National Rifle Association, they have a single issue. They want to promote gun rights. Or PETA that wants to promote the rights for animals. Then, of course, there's intergovernmental interest groups. And these are very interesting. We were talking about PACs or political action committees. What they do is they sponsor certain members of government or even certain parties or even certain political issues that would guide politicians on this. And they raise all of these types of interest groups have a singular goal of raising money to be able to affect change on the issue that they champion. In order to do this, they need to do a lot of things. And this is all under the umbrella of the fact that they lobby. Now, what is lobbying? Okay, I can tell you. What lobbying is it's research, right? They're trying to get politicians to take a position on things. They are trying to build a coalition so that they can get their bills passed in Congress. Essentially, they work every single politician, right? This may be from, who knows, shaking hands, getting meetings together, meeting outside of Capitol Hill. They are essentially social butterflies. The meat of this is when interest groups and parties work together. They form something that is pretty powerful. We call these iron triangles. And this is when Congress, bureaucracy, and interest groups all work together, feeding each other and funding each other, forming a triangle that really cannot be beat in politics. They'll get political favors. They'll get money. They what is called log rolling. You scratch my back and I'll scratch your back. And they are very often able to pass very powerful legislation in government using these iron triangles. I have an example. President Eisenhower, in his closing speech as he's leaving office, warns us about a very scary thing. He calls it the military-industrial complex. And what this is, it is the perfect example of an iron triangle where you see Congress, the Department of Defense, and large military contractors all working together. This is the exact reason why we seem to go to war every 10 years in this country. Congress provides tax funding to the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense gives these contracts to large military contractors, and then, of course, these large military contractors provide campaign contributions to Congress. It is a triangle that works together so well that we have not seen it fail in 70 years, and thus the fears of Eisenhower coming true, that we have not been able to stop this military-industrial complex and this very powerful iron triangle. I hope that you have found this really, really helpful. I know we've gone through everything pretty quickly, but I didn't want to like a 40-minute video. Let's review very quickly. First of all, we talked about parties. We defined what parties were, people that share a similar ideology. And we defined what defines the people inside the parties. There's both pig and pie. We talked about the 6 different party eras going through the history from the very beginning to absolutely present, where we see the Democrats and the Republicans in power today. And of course, how do you choose which party you want to be a part of? Well, typically this is from your family and the demographics that surround you. We then talked about interest groups and lobbyists and what they do, and their shaking little greasy hands moving policy through government. Essentially, without them, I'm not sure policy could move through government. And then lastly, we talked about what happens when parties and interest groups come together. They form these cozy relationships that we call the Iron Triangle. They essentially move policy through government. I hope that you find this helpful. If you need anything from me, again, remember my name is Dr. John Weston Jamison. You can see my YouTube page at jwestonjamison.phd. Leave me a line, leave me an email, and I would be more than happy to help you out. I hope you find this useful, and I cannot wait to see you guys again. See you later. Bye.